You probably stumbled upon some variation of the saying, Japan has been living in the year 2000 since the 1980s. I really like that as an explanation of the incredible feats Japan has achieved leading to the 21st century, and then how their economic performance fell below expectations and completely stagnated shortly after. Long story short, today I'll be trying to explain just what went wrong with Japan's economy. So, to do that, we are going to explore Japan's whole journey. How they went from complete devastation to an economic miracle, and from that to a country stuck in a loop of deflation, stagnation, and uncertainty. Before I jump into their story, I want to make one thing clear. I love Japan. I really do. I had the chance to visit Tokyo and a couple other cities in the past, and I would highly suggest you to visit, experience, and see the Japanese culture and their way of life with your own eyes if you ever get the chance to do so. Now, imagine walking through Shibuya in the 1980s. Neon signs blink over your head, your Sony Walkman headphones are humming with the latest pop hits, and you just hopped off the Shinkansen, the world's first bullet train. I imagine it would feel like you were walking in the future, right? Except it's 1980, and somehow Japan is already living in the year 2000. While most of the world was still coming to terms with the VHS tape and trying to figure out if personal computers were just a passing trend, Japan was already deep into a technological revolution that looked and felt like science fiction. This was the Japanese economic miracle. Let's rewind a bit. After the Second World War, Japan was devastated. Its cities were in ruins, and the economy was essentially non-existent, because the country at large was almost completely destroyed. But from the ashes of that destruction came what's known as the Japanese economic miracle. Between the years 1950 and 1973, Japan's growth can only be described as absurd and amazing. Japan's GDP during that period grew at an average of 9.7 per year. Let that sink in. 9.7. That is nearly double what the US or any country in Europe was achieving during the same time. Japan's manufacturing sector was a key to this miracle. It wasn't just about producing goods. It was about producing them better, faster, and cheaper than anyone else, all at the same time. This was the times when Japan became synonymous with high-quality, cutting-edge products for the first time. Japanese companies such as Sony and Panasonic were basically the Silicon Valley of their time, each driving global consumer trends. Thanks to all of these developments, by the early 1980s, Japan was the second largest economy in the whole world. And the growth stemmed from not just electronics. The automotive industry Japan had was totally dominating the global markets too. They were pumping out cars that were reliable, fuel efficient, and affordable. But if you ask me, Japan's growth and futuristic feeling leading into the 80s wasn't just about good economic figures. I think it was mostly about the way technology integrated into everyday life and the culture back then. Looking back now, Japan's cities in the 80s look like something straight out of a cyberpunk novel. Tokyo's bullet train has been in operation since 1964. Compare that to the rest of the world, where most countries didn't have anything close to high-speed rail until decades later. I don't want to bore you with minute details, but let's take a look at Sony Walkman for instance. Released in 1979, it changed the way people experience music. It was the type of product and innovation people around the world came to expect from Japan. And in my personal opinion, all of the factors I've mentioned in favor of Japan so far in this video all combine to create an economic environment where all Japanese companies try to innovate further and further. So I'm not really surprised to look back and see how many people thought that Japan would eventually surpass the US and become the biggest economy in the world. But we all know that did not happen, because the 1980s saw Japan experience one of the biggest bubbles in history. By 1989, the Nikkei stock market index reached almost 40,000 points. Do you want to guess when it reached the same heights again? Well, in 2024. So that was quite a long time to recover, as we would all agree, right? To give you an idea of how overinflated prices were, the land value of Tokyo's Imperial Palace was said to be worth more than all of the real estate in California. Just try to imagine that. A single palace being worth more than an entire US state. And not just any state, but the most wealthy one. But as with all bubbles, this one eventually popped too. And in the early 1990s, Japan entered what's known as the lost decade. Economic growth stagnated, real estate prices plummeted, and the country faced a financial crisis. Unlike its name, it would unfortunately last way more than a decade. Up until this point, I've told you how futuristic it must have felt to live in Japan leading into the 21st century. But here's the thing, even when the economic figures were looking alright, many other aspects of life in Japan started giving some dire warning signs. I'm talking about record low birth rates and a rapidly aging population. Very long story short, after years and years of declining birth rates, by 2025, 1 in 3 Japanese citizens will be over 65. I certainly think this is a challenge that is way bigger than slowing economic growth in the short term. You can ease the monetary policy all you want and as long as you want, but if your country is lacking and will continue to lack young people who study, work, innovate, and contribute to your economy for a very long time, Well, I just think that is a recipe for disaster. I plan to do a deeper dive someday regarding why the so-called Japanese economic miracle came to a screeching halt, but today I want to end in a more positive note. Some economists think that the aging population and the total demographic collapse in Japan is so bad that they will be one of the first countries who will be forced to solve this problem. I know that doesn't exactly sound like a positive note, but in a way it could be. Japan's resilience, innovation, and the sheer urgency of the situation might push them to pioneer new solutions to declining birth rates that the rest of the world could eventually follow. So that is it from me today. If you want to keep being updated regarding global economic news, breakdowns, and other video essays just like this one, please consider subscribing, commenting, liking, whatever you feel like doing honestly, as it helps out a lot. Take care, and as always, I hope to see you next time.